Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Sarah McCauley, and Sarah's going to present today on how to work with chronic illnesses, grief, and loss, and will be able to provide for us some insights. With that, Sarah, I'd like to formally introduce you and have you take over.
My name is Sarah McCauley. I'm a licensed associate marriage and family therapist, and I work in a private practice in the Twin Cities. I work a lot with grief and loss, chronic health conditions, and families experiencing a lot of medical transition. Today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about grief, what it is, what it isn't, and the experience of grief as something more than death, grief tied to chronic health conditions. So many of us associate grief with something very concrete, the loss of a life. And it is so much more than death. It is a loss of potential, something more ambiguous, maybe retiring early, or the loss of being able to achieve a goal, or even working towards that goal. Something more ambiguous like a transition or a change in the type of relationship you're able to have with someone, or the relationship that you have with your body and its ability to function. It can be a very personal experience. Grief is different for everyone, and it is not a universally defined experience. Everyone has their own pieces of grief they draw back to. What they experience tied to one event may influence the next. And in the same way, it's a very global experience. It's unavoidable. We cannot avoid grief. There's two things in life that are guaranteed: death and taxes. And like I said, it's so much more than death. Especially over this last year with the pandemic, a lot of us have been experiencing a transition of ambiguous loss, a loss of what a holiday could be, a loss of what does it mean to stay in connection with family and friends or participate in the world. Even a loss of routine is something to grieve. And grief is very, very messy. There is no one right way to grieve. There's a few ways that are not recommended, but you can't win at grief. There's no way to check the boxes and be done. Something that a lot of you may be familiar with is the Kubler-Ross model, or the 5 stages of grief, and that's often talked about as like how people grieve. It was originally developed as a linear process in which people who are actively dying experience elements of grief. Now, obviously, that experience of grief cannot always be translated to those grieving around them or those experiencing a non-terminal illness. So the framing I use around grief and loss comes from this book, Transforming Loss. It's by John Schneider, and it's wonderful in how it talks about grieving as a more ambiguous process, that there's so many different areas of life that are associated with grief. We have the emotional experience, the physical experience, the cognitive, the spiritual, the behavioral, the relational. We are impacted by grief and loss in every corner of our life. And it focuses back on 3 main questions that we move through in the process of grief. What is lost? What is left? And what is possible? And as we move through these things in these different areas of life, what is lost in my relationship? What is lost in my physical experience? What is lost emotionally, spiritually? That will affect us differently. This initial coping, that shock of, oh no, I don't have this thing in my life anymore, is a huge thing of what we associate grief with. Once we have identified what is lost, we're able to look at what remains, picking up the pieces and building a new puzzle. What is left? What we do with that puzzle, what is possible, comes later. That idea of what is our life transformed and informed by this loss, not defined by this loss. This is not an easy process. It's not a single line process. We jump back and forth. It's messy. And there might be days that you're asking that question again of, crap, what is lost? Because I thought I knew, but maybe I don't know. And this also comes with this idea of the process of chronic health. This is another book I often reference, Helping Couples and Families Through or Navigate Illness and Disability. It's by John Rolland. He's phenomenal and one of the foremost experts in medical family therapy. And he talks about this experience of moving from diagnosis or pre-diagnosis. We're experiencing symptoms, but we don't know what box we fall in. We think, maybe I'm not drinking enough water. Maybe I'm not sleeping enough. I just need to push myself. That self-blaming rather than that validation of, no, of course you weren't able to do that thing. There's something medically wrong with you. There's a medical condition preventing your body from achieving this. That idea of validation, that movement from ambiguous symptoms to, I fit a diagnosis. Oh no, now what? This crisis and scrambling, the initial appointments, the changing of routine and life, transition. And then we move into more of a chronic phase, the long haul of symptom management. And sometimes that long haul gets derailed and we're back in crisis, reevaluating what does it mean. And sometimes there's a more significant loss that comes as a result of the chronic phase. A loss of an ability, a loss of an opportunity, potentially a loss of life. Some conditions do result in the loss of life. And that terminal component, that ending point, does negatively affect people's ability to function. It puts us back in that crisis of, oh crap, now what? All of that to say that it's messy. It's nonlinear. It affects us in every capacity. And a big thing that came up in the Q&A section that I wanted to touch in about in our conversations of the relational aspect of grief is identity. It's a beautiful thing that the Vasculitis Foundation has the support network and this group in which people are connected by their shared experience of receiving and managing this diagnosis or loving someone who is managing this diagnosis. There's the validation of other people looking at you and saying, I know what you're going through. I know what that feels like. It hurts. It sucks. It's scary. And the people who get to look and say, I know you are resilient. I know that your life is going to be fruitful and beautiful, including this, not in spite of this. There's so much that can be said about the power of community in the isolative components of a diagnosis and managing healthcare conditions, not just for the individuals with the diagnosis, but the family members around them, because there's grief in so many different layers. And when it comes to culture and identity, our world does not do a great job at talking about chronic health and disability when it comes to blame and shame. There's a lot of health conditions that are assumed, you didn't do enough, you didn't do this, that, and the other thing. So you brought this on yourself, you failed. And what we know as medical providers, as healthcare professionals, is very often that is not the case. There are a lot of things that we cannot control. They're going to happen. I didn't choose glasses. I didn't choose a lot of things. And you didn't choose vasculitis. It chose you. There are inherent components of your identity, of your personality, of your sense of self that are not affected by the fact this diagnosis exists. Your humor, your smile, your ability to love is not harmed by this. It might look ever so slightly different because your life has been transformed by this diagnosis. But you as a person have not. You are you. You just so happen to have a relationship with this health condition. And we're impacted by relationships. Thank you for your time. I hope that this is a helpful presentation. I'll be sending links to some books and resources. And please know that there are a number of therapists in the Twin Cities area in the state of Minnesota that are very skilled in working with medical conditions and mental health, whether that's for individuals or families or couples who are struggling with this factor in their life. and we'd be happy to walk alongside you in this journey. Thank you.